This is the Other What podcast.
The other what?
The other what?
The other what? The other what?
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another Other What podcast. We're super excited to dive into family dynamics and growing up queer in the South and how our families viewed it through religion and just where they came from. So Désirée, why don't you start us off with, growing up in Savannah with your fam?
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. So, as you all have heard from the first podcast, was born in DC, but raised in Savannah, Georgia. Came from a family that's been there for generations on both sides of my family. Savannah was an interesting place growing up. There were not a lot of gay people that I knew. And I think I actually attended Savannah's very first gay pride.
No way.
Which was in like late 90s, early 2000s. And it was maybe 60
That's amazing.
people.
Did you ever go to the oyster roast that they had? They had a lesbian oyster roast in Savannah.
No, I probably was
Oh.
living in Atlanta and just like not going back to Savannah because I really wanted to be around gay people.
Wow.
And Atlanta just had every gay person you could imagine you could find here. But I also I'm the oldest out of 6. I have 3 sisters and 2 brothers. But when I was a kid, I told my parents I did not want siblings. And I'm almost 3 years older than my sister right under me. So I thought that was pretty funny that someone that young could vocalize that they wanted to be an only child. Maybe in a past life, I had a lot of siblings and I was like, not in this one. But obviously they didn't listen to me. And I did not get along with most of my siblings until I moved out of the house. And then I thought, well, they're not that bad. What about you, Sharon?
Oh, so I mean, only child just because I'm an only child. So yeah,
Living my dream.
Yeah, I know, but it's really not a dream, to be honest. I actually dream about having siblings like you, so I think it's always greener on the other side. Yeah, so I'm, obviously my immigrant parents, they were only able to have one child. It took them like 8 years to have me. So I just had there was a lot of just, it's a lot of pressure. And even now, right, my parents are in their 80s and I'm the only one. And Désirée, I don't know about you, but you probably had a large extended family like cousins and aunties and uncles.
Yes.
I have nobody in the United States, and I
Wow.
had nobody in the United States. And we didn't even go back to Singapore until I was 12. So I did not grow up with anybody over, like even my aunts and uncles in Singapore. I have like 30, 35 cousins. I have a huge family in Singapore. They're all strangers to me. And it was always weird going, like when I went back for the first time, they would open up these albums of me growing up from age like 0 to 12 and complete strangers. Like I don't know who my uncle was, but he has every picture of me. It's like, it's
So
the
your
weirdest
parents
thing.
were just sending them pictures?
They would send them pictures.
Okay.
Yeah. Airmail. Before the internet, right? They would go airmail and like they would just send them like actual pictures. And it was really weird being the American cousin. And I would go to Singapore and they would make fun of my American accent and everything like that. But I was also like I was the first grandchild on my dad's side. So I was also very revered that way. Like my Chinese name actually means blessing on the go households. That's kind of what it means.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. Because, I was the first grandchild.
What's your Chinese name, Sharon?
So my Chinese name is Wu Jialing. And so my last name in English is Go, but my Chinese name, if I was actually Chinese, it would be Wu, W-U. But because we speak a dialect in southern China, and then we immigrated to Singapore, my last name went from Wu to Go, and that's kind of how it happened.
Okay.
Yeah, and Go is like Smith in Singapore. So if you meet other Goes, you're gonna be like, oh, you're related to Sharon. No. Everybody has the last name Go. Like everybody does. It's crazy. So anyways.
And I notice you capitalize the G and the O and the H is lowercase?
No, that's just because I typoed it.
Is that
That's
intentional?
I typoed it. But it does look good,
Okay.
right? The go, right? No, yeah. So it's funny. It is
Okay.
funny though because people ask me all the time, "How do you pronounce it?" And I'm like, "Just go. It doesn't. No, there's no fanciness to it. The H is silent, kind of thing." But I think it's interesting from like a family dynamic because you know my parents, as immigrants, there was also this weird thing in Asian culture, and it still is very prevalent on what they call the success perm. And the reason, and we're going to put a link in the show notes to this because I think Fresh Off the Boat did a great take on this on YouTube. I was telling Désirée, I think Eddie Huang and I had like parallel lives. It was like crazy. But like Asians think that if you have curly hair, which Désirée, you have very curly hair.
I do. Yes.
You are
I'm nailing the success,
nailing the
baby.
success. Yes.
Nailing it.
And so what would happen was when I was in middle school, my mom would give me home perms all the time. And she permed her hair. Her hair is super straight. She permed her hair the whole time she lived in the United States. And so I got these, and we'll post pictures on Instagram of these like horrible home perms that I have too. But it like signifies success. And what I think is really funny is that I was watching a K-drama recently. It's a new one out of Korea called The Uncanny Counters. And we'll put a link to that too. And when this guy gets like his superpowers, guess what? His hair gets curly. I swear to God. And then when like the evil guy takes away his powers, his hair goes limp and flat and straight. Isn't that crazy?
Oh my gosh.
It's crazy.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Because growing up for me, I hated having curly hair.
See?
Because it was so different and kids would make fun of me. They would call me Pocahontas, even though Pocahontas had straight hair, but I had very long curly hair and would, beg my mom we would use a hot comb because my mom had much thicker hair than me. So like the old put it on the stove, hot comb to straighten your hair.
Wow, that's crazy.
Definitely didn't need that much heat on my hair, but I never liked my curls. It wasn't until I was probably in college that I was like, you know what? This is pretty nice to have this kind of curly hair.
It's so, isn't it funny? Like growing up, like we always wanted what each other didn't have.
Yes.
And, like even like with my parents would pinch my nose when I was little because my nose was too flat. And it wasn't Caucasian enough, right? Caucasians have a very they have a very thinner nose, whatever, pointier nose. And what I found was that like I have friends who their parents would actually put a clothespin on their nose.
Wow.
When they were little. Yeah. Thinking that would help, because the cartilage is still very soft and you can make the nose sharper. Like that's kind of how I grew up. It was insane. It was a little weird.
That's insane, but not insane because when I was a kid, just, unconsciously, I always I never had a flatter nose, but I would always kind of do like this, like pinch it or push it up.
You would do it to yourself? No way.
I think it was just a twitch or something I had. But my dad used to always say, you're going to make it too pointy and it's not going to look good. But then I actually started working for one of my first jobs when I moved back to DC in 2004. I worked at a cosmetic medical spa and we had a facial plastic surgeon. And he said, Désirée, you have the nose that people pay me to make. So I tell my dad, look, I guess I did it right.
Damn, Désirée, that is a high compliment. So for me, when I lived in Korea for a little over a year, plastic surgery capital of the world. And they would do two things. They would make your nose pointier and look more Caucasian, or they would do double eyelid surgery, which is insane. How do we make ourselves look more white?
Yeah. Did you ever watch Bling Empire?
No,
on Netflix?
I never watched it. I can't do reality TV shows. They kind of trigger too much for me.
It sucked me in. I think you and I talked about this one of our first times hanging out on the show. And there's an episode about one of the guys who was Korean who had the double eyelid surgery, trying to talk one of his friends out of doing it because he feels like it took away from his Asianness now that he's older, and how he regrets that.
Yeah.
That was just so fascinating.
It's
to
crazy,
me.
but it is. It's this like need to be whiter. It's just strange. Like all the
Mm-hmm.
whitening creams, and I don't know. It was a little insane, but
Yeah.
all right, so let's move on. I think that the next thing, and like we mentioned this in one of our first podcasts, was about religion, and I think it's super interesting is that your family converted from Christianity to Judaism. I would love to dive
Yes.
into that, because what's interesting for
Yeah.
me is that my family converted from Buddhism to Christianity, so I'm like catching up with you.
All right. We'll talk about that after the break.
Great.
So Sharon, from Buddhism to Catholicism, walk me through that.
I know, isn't that crazy? So I think that I don't really know all the history of my family, but I just think that the Christian missionaries, the Catholic missionaries, just did a really, really bang up job in Asia. And
Mm-hmm.
my family, my dad's family was Catholic even in China when they immigrated down to Singapore, but my mom's family was Buddhist all the way through Singapore. Even my grandmother was on her deathbed, and they converted her to Christianity. Yeah, it
Wow.
was insane. It's like, you're going to go to hell unless you get baptized in the Christian church,
Right.
because you're a heathenist Buddhist kind of thing. And then she's like, oh, and then she was on her deathbed, and then she literally died like a day later. It was insane. And then my
Wow.
grandfather, who died a really long time ago, like when my mom was in her teens, they cremate everybody in Singapore because there's no space to bury anybody,
Okay.
right? And so you actually live
Okay.
in high rises. Like you live in a high rise when you're alive, and then when you're dead, you also live in a high rise. And yeah, and
Interesting.
so what happens is, like, the first floor is the Christian floor, the second floor is the Jewish floor, the third floor is the Buddhist floor. It's like super crazy, kind of cool. There's an Indian
Dang.
floor for, like, Hindu and stuff like that. So
Wow.
anyway, so my grandfather at the time, when I first visited when I was 12, they had him in a Buddhist temple, and it was the coolest thing. And I had never been to a Buddhist temple before. My mom took me, and there's these like huge tortoises in this huge pool, and you buy like cabbage from an old
Sounds
lady.
elaborate.
I know, it's crazy. And you'd throw the cabbage to the tortoises, and if they ate it, it was good luck, And I had like the incense sticks, and then you had to, pray at the altar, and they would actually bring the urn out. Like, you had to schedule the urn to see my grandfather's urn. So that was the first time
Okay.
I ever been to a Buddhist temple, and that was like super cool. And then the next time I went back, they had moved him into one of those high rises onto a Christian floor. And it was weird. I was like, what? I thought we were going to go to the temple. Now we're actually, like, again, at this like weird high rise, and it's the Christian floor kind of thing. And that's kind of what happened. And so now my whole entire family is Christian, either Baptist or Catholic. And the Catholics there are what I call charismatic Catholics. So have you ever like encountered Pentecostals where they like speak in tongues, or they handle snakes, or they fall back, like the guy lays hands and falls back? It is literally.
I went to church one time with my dad to a Pentecostal church, and it scared the shit out of me.
Totally.
I was like, do not bring me back
So
here.
Désirée, imagine that, but with a Catholic priest. That's what it was. And so when I came out, I came out to my parents, and we'll talk about the whole coming out story later. I went to Singapore for a trip after college, and my parents left, and they left me there, and they were like, Sharon needs to go to mass. And so they made me go to this, like, they called it a healing mass, and it was 3 hours of singing Christian, like, Catholic songs.
Oh my God.
The priest laid hands, and people like fell back, right? My aunt spoke in tongues. I was like, where the F am I right now? This is crazy. And I was with my cousin at the time. And after the 3 hours, we were so spent. She's like, do you need to get a drink? And I was like, yes, let's go get a drink. And then we went straight to Sultan Muhammad, which is where like all of the bars were in Singapore. But it was insane. It was like, it really showed me just like how religion was so ingrained in my family.
Mm-hmm.
And how also like I kind of loved that I was also removed from it. I didn't grow up with
Yeah.
this family. I didn't have to go to church the way they wanted me to go to church. It was like
Yeah.
I was a tourist, and it was nice. It was actually really good.
You can get
I
away
could get
from it.
away from
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, my family never super religious. We did like all the up until I was probably about 12, 11 or 12, we did Christmas after the day after Thanksgiving. We would drive 2 hours. I can't remember if we were going like up to like Dublin or Macon or some other part of Georgia, because when you're kids, you don't know what the directions you're going. But we would go to like this Christmas tree farm to get chop down a Christmas tree, put it on top of our van. My dad would tie it down really good, drive 2 hours back. But then my mom had this idea and feeling that Christianity was not for her. I was baptized Episcopalian. I would go to church occasionally with my grandparents, on my dad's parents. My mom's side wasn't super religious. They were kind of Catholic, but not really. More kind of like around the high holidays type, like a lot of Christians in the US. But I just never felt comfortable in church. I always felt like, and maybe it was a Black church, and that's a different thing in itself. There's always talks of, going against homophobia and all this other stuff. And I just thought, well, I don't want to hear this. And I just hated going. The only thing I enjoyed about church is we had a few really close friends that went to the same one. And we would just kind of hang out in the back as much as possible, or and we'd have summer camp, which was kind of fun. But when it was like super religious, I just did not like it. And I felt like we were there for way too long, even though it was probably only like an hour, hour and a half. But that was just too long for me, which is ironic, Sharon, because when we converted to Judaism, or when my mom started going to synagogue, you'd be in there all day, like from probably 10 in the morning till 2 or so in the afternoon, but it never felt like super long to me. And I think go ahead.
No, I was going to ask you, what's the difference? Because
the difference was, for me, when you're in church, you're supposed to sit still and be quiet. But when you're in synagogue, and I don't know if you've ever been to a synagogue, people are having sidebar conversations. They're getting up, they're walking around. Kids are running around in the lobby area. And that's kind of acceptable. And I was like, oh, this is kind of nice. And I don't ever remember hearing any rabbi talk about homosexuality. And perhaps it was just the synagogue I was going to. We went to a conservative synagogue, which is kind of funny that it's labeled conservative. It's kind of in the middle. You have like your Reform, have Messianic Jews who are your Jews for Jesus. You have the Reform who are like, we probably still eat shrimp. You have conservatives.
Wait, I need a t-shirt.
Yeah.
I think we gotta still eat shrimp.
Yeah. You have conservatives, which are like kind of in the middle, not overly religious, but still do things. And you have your Orthodox and your Hasidic, like more. And I don't know. I just thought it felt more inviting to me. It felt more comfortable. I felt like I had more of a community. And even as an adult, I kind of miss that feeling of like going to synagogue on Saturdays. I really enjoyed it and made a lot of good friends from it. And I have a friend here who's half Jewish and half Puerto Rican. And she was just mentioning to me the other day, like, Désirée, we should go to synagogue. She goes to Catholic mass all the time. But she's like, I want to get back into going to synagogue. So we joke and say like that we're covered no matter what.
So here's my question. I'm super curious.
Yeah.
Why Judaism? Why not another Christianity? Why not something else?
Yeah, well, my mom went to a majority Black high school, but there were a few Jewish students, and she was friends with them. And from what I can remember, she just thought this religion seemed more that aligned with what she believed and what she felt was right for her. And because we are her kids, we really didn't have a say in what was going to happen religiously for us at that stage of our lives. So when my mom decided she was converting to Judaism, everything Christian wise stopped. So no more Christmas. We didn't go to church anymore. And that I was okay with that. I was like, all right. So I had to do because I was older than the bat mitzvah age, I had to go to like the conversion classes myself. So those were like typically a Wednesday class where you go and you learn about stuff, and they have like a Wednesday school. I was also on the JEA, which is Jewish Education Alliance. I was on the basketball team there. And funny enough, I was the center at 5'1.5" because all the other girls were really short.
Wait, is that a stereotype on Jewish girls that they're all really short?
I don't think so. I just thought it was funny because we had girls who were like almost in middle school age also that played on the team, because it was like basically playing for like a YMCA, a city league team, so you can have a broader age range. But I was also, myself and two of the other girls on the team, we played for our high school teams. So it was just a lot of fun. That has nothing to do with my religion, but it's just a fun story.
Well, no, that's hilarious. I mean, I actually, I did the whole Christian camp thing, Sunday school, whatever they call it. And I remember us going to Cape Hatteras, North Carolina for one of those like week trips where like all the youth group, the kids go, right? And for some reason, I got put into a house with all girls, and they called us the lesbian house. And this is when we were like
I love
11, 12. I was young. And we were like, yay, we're the lesbian house. I had no idea what that meant. No idea. And like we're on a freaking church trip. It was hilarious.
How many girls from that trip that were in the lesbian house are actually lesbians?
I have no idea because it was in Maryland. I don't talk to these ladies anymore. But it was all of them. It was all the
misfits. Please find them, Sharon. Please find them. Go on LinkedIn, Instagram, find them, and just do a poll.
Totally.
I would love to.
I'm sure there was a majority, especially if we got that label from the church trip, for sure. All right. Well, we're gonna talk about queerness in our families and how they view it right after the break.
Lesbian.
Oh my God, it was crazy. It was so weird. And I remember like, what? I was always with the misfit girls.
House of Lesbian.
That's right. I remember it so distinctly. Like, it's so crazy. Oh my God. Yeah. Christian school, great. Like Catholic school is weird. Christians are weird.
Yeah. I just never liked going to church, Sharon. I hate it. I just felt like this is torture.
Oh, yeah.
But when I was going to synagogue, I was like, this is not
I got
bad.
A nun fired from my grade school. Oh my God. You should hear the stories when I went to Catholic school. These nuns were crazy. Cray.
I've dated some Catholic school girls.
Of course you have.
Yeah.
Désirée dated like you.
I've got a range.
You do. You have a rainbow of ladies. That is for sure.
I do, but
yes.
Thank you, Andrew. I actually, I was at dinner last night with a couple of friends, and we were just laughing at like, my history in dating has been so many straight or bi-curious women. I welcome you into the community. That is my job. I welcome you, get you lined up, get your packet information, get your health insurance squared away, make sure you know what you're supposed to do, and then I send you out into the community.
Dude, you should have gotten paid for that. You should have totally gotten paid for that. Oh, man.
I know. So Sharon, how did your parents and family feel about you being queer?
Oh man, this is like a really multi-layered question. So you've got the immigrant thing, you've got the only child thing, right? And then you had the religion thing. So my parents sent me to 6 years of Catholic school. They They went to like novena masses like every Friday. They always tell me like it took them 8 years to have a kid. They prayed to God every day to have a kid. Like it's just like one of those things. So to view queerness, I don't think they understood it. I don't think they understood. They didn't know what gay was. My mom would always say the gay, like she would always like put a a preposition in front of it instead of just being gay. And I'm like, Mom, it's not the gay, right?
Yeah.
But and we'll talk about like the coming out stories. But I think that I think there was frustration, and there was because they didn't understand it, and I think there was also a sense of disappointment because I wasn't going to marry a man. And what growing up for me was about, you will marry a white man because they have power. And that is what my mother wanted me to do. And so it's like, from the age of 15, you will marry a white man. And I was like, I got close. I married a white woman. Like, does that, but not really. So, but so I think that they struggled with it. I think more from an immigrant perspective than even from a religious perspective, because we were so far removed from my family being in Singapore, being religious. It was all about saving face. It's the whole Asian thing about saving face. They can't brag to their friends about me having a marriage to like a rich white man, right? They can't do that.
Right.
And for Asian immigrants, it's all about bragging rights. My dad bought a Rolex. Did he really need a Rolex? No, but he wanted to take pictures with his Rolex in front of his Mercedes Benz. That's what my dad wanted to do, because but it's exactly right. He totally did the pose. If I can find those pictures, you will totally be like immigrant pose for sure, in front of his big house, right? That was gaudy and overdone, Mercedes Benz and his Rolex. It was crazy. And so I think that being queer, one, completely didn't understand it, but two, they realized very quickly that it wasn't something that they could really talk to anybody about. And I think that kind of, we'll unpack a lot of that, especially through the coming out stories, but like my parents have come a long way, and they've really embraced me being queer over the last like 20 years. And I really appreciate that, right? Like they came to my wedding, which is great. And I think that being away from my family in Singapore that was very conservative actually was better for them. And the progressiveness of my parents being the only people from their family coming to the Americas, because they were already rebels, this was not as impactful to them for me being queer.
Gotcha.
It was more of just them getting used to the fact that their daughter is different, So I'm very grateful for that. My mom was actually very progressive about it. My dad took a little bit longer, but man, they've been such loving people since I came out. I can't really say, too much more about that.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, I'm glad they came around for you. For me, I had older gay cousins. My mom had like two first cousins who were gay, so it wasn't like a new idea in my family. However, my mother had a really hard time with it. Which I was super surprised about, Sharon, because I'm like, you grew up with two cousins who, were some of your favorite people, but you're shocked and disappointed that I'm gay. And unlike you, Sharon, I have other siblings that they could have this dream of the wedding and the kids and stuff with, because I'm not an only child. So it's not like I was their only hope. But it was just really interesting that she was so upset about that. My dad was kind of like, well, I kind of suspected. And my siblings were so young at the time. I had only, which I'll tell more of the story on another episode, but I had only told my sister under me at first. But the other ones were too young. They didn't really know what was going on. But other family were pretty cool with it. It wasn't for my mom, though. She would be a little cordial to some folks I dated. Other people, you could be in the same room and she would just not even talk to you. But it wasn't until 2014, which was just almost 10 years ago now. She and I took a cross-country road trip for a month. We were gone for a month. we drove from Savannah to Seattle, down to San Diego, and then back across with some stops along the way because my sister, who's right under me, was having a baby and really wanted us to be in San Diego when she had the baby. So my mom and I were like, well, let's make a road trip out of it. And when you're on a road trip, you're stuck in this car, you got to talk.
That's
So
right.
this was a great trapping for me to talk to her about stuff. And we just like really, she couldn't get away from the conversations of, these tough conversations about how things made me feel because, and I'll share my coming out story a bit. Like she went through a phase of reading all of these like books about like conversion and stuff like
no.
and I was like, it was so heartbreaking for me. Yeah. And I was like, Mommy, and she like read them and would highlight stuff. And that just like broke my heart. One, I'm like, why are you giving these people your money?
Mm-hmm.
Two, I'm like, in 2014, especially, there were so many stories of all these young people like killing themselves because of, their families not supporting them. And, I had to kind of break it down to her in that level. Like, if somebody said something to me that made me feel less than, that then made me feel like this was something I had to do because I saw no other way out.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how would you feel? And she was like, oh, no, I would not want that to happen. So I'm like, okay. So anyway, at the end of that road trip, I remember I was about to drive back to Atlanta and she hugged me and she's like, I really just want you to be happy. And I don't care if it's with a man or a woman, but please just make sure she's attractive.
I love your mom. That is amazing.
I know. And then we laughed and cried.
Just make sure she's attractive. Oh my God.
Make sure
okay,
she's
so Désirée,
attractive.
my parents never talked to me about that. I think it's beautiful that you had that.
Yeah.
They've never really acknowledged the fact that they were like, we want you to be happy. They just kind of like have gone along with it. But I think if my parents ever did that for me, they'd be like, just make sure she has a good job.
Yeah.
They're like,
yes.
just make sure she's got a job. Like that's all they would worry about right now.
Oh my
I know.
God, that's hilarious.
It's too funny.
That's
funny.
Hilarious. Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for joining us for the Other What podcast. I hope this was interesting and enlightening, just hearing our backstories. And we've got many, many more stories to come. So please join us.
I would love to even hear some stories from some listeners. Like if you all have any stories, go to our website, theotherwhat.com. Tell us some stuff. Everybody's story is important and unique. You can send us messages on Instagram. Reach out to us. We love it. And thanks so much.
Yeah. Thank you guys.
Love ya.
For more The Other What, check out our other episodes. You can find those at theotherwhat.com. Have comments, thoughts, or reactions to something we said? Be sure to subscribe and comment. The Other What is a production of 559 Labs. The Other What is hosted by Sharon Go and Désirée Jamerson. This episode was produced and edited by Andrew Marconi. Music by Alexei Anisimov. It was recorded in Atlanta, Georgia. Thanks for listening and be sure to tune in next time.